Imagine waking up one day and realizing years have flown by, and the mirror reflects a nearly unchanged image. Dreams, once vivid and alluring, now seem like distant echoes. Goals, set with such enthusiasm, have faded under the weight of routine. A life full of promise and opportunity has transformed into a hazy fantasy, slipping away with each passing day. You can't help but feel stuck, passively watching as the river of time carries you along. You wait for change, hoping for a miracle, but nothing happens. Have you ever wondered why people's fates differ so greatly? Why do some boldly embrace change, transforming their lives, while others are doomed to perpetually waver between desire and inaction? Today we will reveal the secret of a quiet force that can undermine your success, rob you of happiness, and bury your potential, even if you don't realize it. This force is passivity, a treacherous habit of standing aside while life rushes forward. It's a subtle, almost invisible trap that prevents you from making the necessary changes you've longed for. And the most terrible thing is that most people will never escape its clutches. But listen carefully, because by the end of this narrative, you will not only recognize how apathy and inaction entangle your life like insidious webs, but you will also discover the most effective way to break free from their oppressive influence. And believe me, the final conclusion will be the cornerstone of your transformation, the spark that ignites the flame of a future full of decisive actions, unwavering confidence, and unstoppable energy. Passivity, like an invisible parasite, erodes from within, acting as one of the most destructive psychological patterns capable of enslaving the human soul. At first glance, its presence is not always obvious, as it skillfully hides behind a mask of patience, excessive analysis, or even a false sense of caution. But in reality, it is a slow-acting poison that contaminates your existence. It keeps you in circumstances that have long lost their appeal, allows animalistic fear to dictate your decisions, and convinces you that a wait-and-see approach is the most reasonable choice, while your inner voice desperately whispers that only active actions can lead to the desired result. But what are the roots of this passivity? Why do some people, like arrows, rush forward towards new horizons, while others remain bound by the chains of inaction, unable to take even the smallest step? Psychologists have been studying this complex phenomenon for many years, and one of the most authoritative explanations comes from Martin Seligman, the distinguished founder of positive psychology. He introduced the world to the concept of learned helplessness, which reveals the mechanism of passivity formation in people under the influence of repeated negative events and the feeling of being unable to influence the situation. In his groundbreaking experiments, Martin Seligman encountered the phenomenon where dogs, subjected to multiple and uncontrollable negative stimuli, eventually lost the will to resist. Even when a path to salvation opened before them, they remained passive, as if resigned to their fate. This principle is also reflected in human psychology. Constantly facing failures, rejections, or disappointments, people begin to lose faith in their own abilities, convinced of the futility of any effort. This belief deeply penetrates the consciousness, determining behavior and ultimately shaping reality. However, passivity is not always the result of failures. There is also a more insidious reason: comfort. Surely everyone has noticed how easy it is to get bogged down in routine, even if it doesn't bring joy or satisfaction. The human brain, striving for safety and predictability, instinctively avoids everything new and unknown. In the distant past, this survival mechanism helped our ancestors avoid unnecessary risks, ensuring their survival. But in the modern world, this instinct often works against us. We get used to the familiar and safe, even if it doesn't correspond to our true desires and needs. Days turn into weeks, weeks into years, and without realizing it, we miss opportunities and life passes us by. This is where the real danger of inaction lies, cunningly disguised as tranquility. It doesn't announce itself loudly, doesn't foretell trouble with an alarm bell, doesn't shower us with a hail of warnings. On the contrary, it creeps in on soft paws, enveloping the mind in silence. With a sweet whisper, it lulls vigilance, whispering about an endless supply of time, about the possibility of a triumphant start in the rays of a coming day, about the wise decision to wait for some mythical shining hour. But the harsh truth of life ruthlessly shatters these crystal castles. The perfect moment is just a chimera, a ghost eluding reality. There is only the relentless here and now, and with each missed second, the burden of inaction becomes increasingly unbearable, paralyzing the will and binding movements. But let's momentarily distract ourselves from the pressing hustle and bustle and turn our gaze to a more fundamental question. What price do we pay for our passivity? What happens when indecision and apathy become our worst enemies, determining the course of our lives? Viktor Frankl, an outstanding psychiatrist who went through the crucible of the Holocaust, left us an invaluable legacy in his book Man's Search for Meaning, where he gave a deep and insightful answer to this question. He argued that the main driving force that determines human behavior is not the pursuit of pleasure, as Sigmund Freud believed, and not the thirst for power, as Friedrich Nietzsche claimed, but the search for meaning. According to Frankl, a person devoid of a sense of purpose is doomed to wander aimlessly through life, like a restless wanderer lost in a vast desert, chained by emptiness and despair. And nothing devastates life so much, deprives it of color and meaning, as the curse of passivity, slowly but surely corroding the soul. Think for a moment, when was the last time you felt the fullness of life? Did this feeling arise in moments of indecision, in anticipation of favorable circumstances, or in attempts to avoid difficulties? Or did it come when you boldly left your usual comfort zone, took a decisive step towards the unknown, and dedicated yourself to something truly important? The truth is that the meaning of life is not found in inaction. It is born in active activity. However, a question arises that many people prefer not to ask themselves. If passivity is so destructive, why do we so often succumb to it? Why do we get stuck, even realizing the need to move forward? The answer may be unexpected, and understanding it can radically change your life. Imagine standing before a choice, knowing that active actions can change everything, but you are still tormented by doubts. You convince yourself that you need more time, that the conditions are not yet ideal, that you will take care of it tomorrow. But tomorrow turns into next week, a week into next year, and before you realize it, nothing changes. This is the manifestation of the invisible force of passivity, the main reason why so many people find themselves trapped in a life that does not bring them true satisfaction. But why is humanity so often trapped in inaction, even realizing the urgent need for change? What invisible force shackles our will and prevents us from moving forward? To understand this issue, it is necessary to turn to the concept known as the comfort trap. At first glance, the desire for comfort seems quite natural and justified. Who among us does not want to feel safe, secure, and at ease? However, this is where the paradox lies. The deeper we immerse ourselves in the comfort zone, the less motivation we have for the risky steps that are so necessary for personal growth and development. Comfort is certainly pleasant in the moment, but often it is achieved at the cost of missed opportunities and unrealized potential in the long term. Surely, many have encountered a situation where they stayed in a job they didn't like, simply because the prospect of finding a new place seemed too difficult and tiring, or they continued to maintain relationships that had long ceased to bring joy, simply because of fear of the unknown and unwillingness to change anything. This is the manifestation of the comfort trap in action. It cunningly convinces us that staying in place, in a familiar environment, is much preferable to facing uncertainty and challenges. However, the bitter truth is that the biggest regrets in life are not about the mistakes we make, but about the opportunities we never dared to use. That is why it is so important to be aware of the danger of the comfort trap and find the strength to go beyond it, towards new horizons and unexplored paths. Psychologists have made an interesting discovery. The human brain has a built-in program aimed at avoiding uncertainty. In the distant past, when our ancestors struggled to survive, the ability to foresee events was vital. By avoiding risks, they protected themselves from the dangers that lurked at every turn. However, in the modern world, this ancient instinct often plays a cruel joke on us. Instead of serving as a reliable defense, it becomes an insurmountable barrier to success. In an effort to avoid potential threats, we ultimately miss out on valuable opportunities that could change our lives for the better. The harsh truth is that no one has ever reached the top while staying in their comfort zone. Every person who has left their mark on history has faced discomfort, uncertainty, and fear. The difference between those who succeed and those who stay put lies not in the level of intelligence, talent, or luck, but in the willingness to act despite the overwhelming dread. This brings us to a crucial question. How do you break free from the tenacious grip of passivity? How do you stop languishing in anticipation and start moving forward? One of the most effective methods is a strategy proposed by the well-known motivational speaker and writer Mel Robbins. She developed a simple yet incredibly effective technique called the 5-second rule. The essence of this rule is as follows. When an impulse arises to act towards achieving a goal, you need to count down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then immediately take action. Do not allow your mind to waver. Do not give fear a single chance to creep in. Act before your brain has time to find convincing arguments against it. The described method is effective because it breaks the vicious cycle of obsessive thinking and encourages immediate action. It is also important to shift the focus from motivation to self-discipline. Often, people postpone actions, waiting for a surge of inspiration. However, motivation is fickle. It comes and goes. Relying solely on it makes it difficult to achieve consistent results. It is self-discipline that drives real change. It implies performing necessary actions, even in the absence of desire. This means making decisions based on set goals, not fleeting emotions. James Clear, the author of the bestseller Atomic Habits, emphasizes that success lies not in radical changes that occur overnight, but in steadily following small, consistent steps. Daily improvement of just 1% leads to the accumulation of these minor changes, which ultimately leads to impressive results. Inaction, on the other hand, works in the opposite direction. The slightest hesitations and deviations from tasks also accumulate, forming a life full of missed opportunities and regrets. However, there is an aspect that often goes unnoticed. Passivity penetrates our lives not only in moments of making important decisions, but also in everyday trifles. This manifests in hesitation when there is an opportunity to express your opinion at a meeting, in postponing the start of physical exercises, in aimlessly scrolling through social media feeds instead of dedicating time to important work. Each manifestation of passivity strengthens the habit of inaction, which in turn makes any attempts to change the situation more difficult. That is why self-reflection plays such an important role. It is necessary to learn to recognize the moments when passivity takes over. You should ask yourself questions. What tasks am I constantly postponing? In what situations do fear or the desire for comfort control my decisions? How will my life change if I stop hesitating and start acting? Before moving on to the most effective ways to overcome passivity, it is important to recognize another factor that keeps millions of people in a life they do not love. Understanding this factor will allow you to look at passivity from a completely new angle. Behind passivity lies a powerful force that most people do not realize, one of the most serious psychological barriers to action. This is not fear, not laziness, and not a lack of motivation, but something much more insidious. Identity paralysis. The condition called identity paralysis occurs when a person involuntarily begins to identify with their current limitations, forgetting about their hidden potential. This manifests in the belief that I am who I am, or I have always been this way, which leads to a sense of immutability of personality, ingrained habits and behaviors, and any changes seem unattainable. Think about it. If an individual considers themselves incapable of discipline, how likely is it that they will be able to stick to new beneficial habits? If they are convinced that they are not destined to be a leader, will they take initiative in situations that require confidence and decisiveness? If a person constantly tells themselves that they are bad at making decisions, will they ever truly be able to take control of their life? Identity shapes actions, and actions, in turn, determine the future. That is why many people remain in a vicious cycle of inaction, not because of an inability to change, but because of a lack of belief in such a possibility. Psychologist Carol Dweck, who has dedicated her research to studying mindset, has found that people tend to adhere to one of 2 points of view: a fixed mindset or a growth mindset. Those with a fixed mindset are convinced of the immutability of their abilities, intelligence, and character traits. They try to avoid difficulties, fearing that failures will only highlight their limitations. In contrast, people with a growth mindset believe in the possibility of development and improvement through effort and learning. They enthusiastically embrace challenges, realizing that failure is not a sentence, but a stepping stone towards personal growth. Inaction finds fertile ground in minds ossified in the belief that their qualities are unchangeable. A person convinced that their fate is predetermined by external circumstances loses the will to change their life. However, as soon as the thought arises in the mind about the possibility of growth and development, that any skill or character trait can be improved, the shackles of passivity are broken. But how to make this revolution in consciousness? How to break free from the trap of self-identification that dooms one to inaction? The key to liberation lies in actions dictated by a new image of oneself. James Clear, in his book Atomic Habits, convincingly proves that genuine changes occur not through setting ambitious goals, but through transforming self-perception. Instead of fixating on desired achievements, one should focus on forming a personality capable of achieving these achievements. Striving for self-confidence, one must begin to act as a self-confident person would act. Desiring to gain discipline, one should make decisions that a disciplined person would make. Each, even the most insignificant action, becomes a kind of voice in support of the emerging new I. Each act strengthens the identity of the person you aspire to become. It is necessary to act before motivation appears. This is an undeniable truth. It is generally accepted that a feeling of readiness should precede any action. However, as practice shows, it is action that generates motivation. Even a small step forward can transform a person, allowing them to look at themselves from a different angle. As soon as this shift in consciousness occurs, the impetus for further movement begins to grow like an avalanche. But there is another aspect. Inertia is not just a state of mind or self-identification, it is also a deeply rooted emotional resistance. Many people find themselves in a dead end because taking action causes them strong psychological discomfort. This may be due to fear of failure, fear of judgment, or fear of leaving the former version of themselves in the past. Neurobiological studies confirm that the brain reacts to psychological threats in the same way as to physical ones. When a person thinks about going beyond their comfort zone, the brain perceives this as a potential danger and activates the amygdala, the area responsible for fear and self-preservation instincts. That is why taking action often seems so difficult. The brain is not trying to harm, it is simply trying to protect from the unknown. However, it is important to understand that it is not necessary to get rid of fear to start taking active action. It is much more important to learn to act despite its presence. Each such action, taken despite fear, has a profound effect on the structure of the brain, teaching it to perceive discomfort not as a signal of danger, but as a temporary state. This contributes to the development of so-called psychological flexibility, the ability to move forward even when confidence in one's abilities leaves much to be desired. And the more often a person practices this approach, the more natural and familiar it becomes. If inaction is firmly rooted in thinking, self-awareness, and emotional resistance, the question arises how to break out of this vicious circle. The answer to this question is simple, but unfortunately escapes the attention of most people. As soon as this realization comes, life changes dramatically. The key to overcoming passivity is accepting radical responsibility. Radical responsibility implies an unconditional recognition of the fact that a person's life is solely in their own hands. There should be no room for expectations, excuses, or blaming circumstances, other people, or even the past. This means a clear awareness that no one will come to help, and that every choice, made or not made, has a direct impact on shaping the future. For many, accepting this truth becomes a difficult test, as it deprives a person of the opportunity to justify their inaction. However, realizing this fact can become a powerful liberating factor, because taking full responsibility for one's life returns control over it. A person ceases to be a passive observer waiting for change and becomes an active creator of their destiny. Often, people make the mistake of believing that taking responsibility implies immediately solving all problems. It seems they believe that a flawless plan, absolute certainty, and complete clarity are necessary to begin. But this is just an illusion. In reality, clarity arises during the process of action, not before it. Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon, once shared an important observation regarding decision-making. He noted that waiting for 100% certainty before making a decision inevitably leads to being late. According to him, in life, it's rare to have perfect information or feel completely ready. However, if at least 70% of the information is available to make a decision, one must act, as action stimulates learning, and learning, in turn, allows for more informed decisions. The secret to outstanding achievements lies not in flawless planning, but in decisive actions taken despite unpredictability. It is those who dare to start without waiting to feel fully prepared, who move forward in small steps, learning from practice and adjusting their course along the way, who reach the top. However, fear of failure often paralyzes people, preventing them from taking active steps. The fear of making a mistake is so strong that they prefer inaction to risk. But they miss an important point. Failure is not the antonym of success, but an integral part of it. Let's remember Thomas Edison, who, when asked about his numerous failures in the process of inventing the electric light bulb, said, "I have not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work." This is the mindset that characterizes every successful person in history. They realize that failure is not a judgment of their worth or abilities, but valuable feedback, a source of information. And the only real failure is surrendering to difficulties, giving up on further attempts. A logical question arises: how to apply these principles in practice? How to break free from the shackles of passivity and start living purposefully and energetically? First of all, it is necessary to abandon the misconception that preliminary motivation is required to start an activity. In reality, motivation is a consequence of action, not its root cause. Instead of passively waiting for inspiration, action should be transformed into an unconditional automatic habit, like a daily ritual. Secondly, a fundamental revision of one's own identity is required. It is necessary to discard the outdated image of oneself as a person who has difficulty taking action, or who has always been prone to inaction. The past is not a rigid predestination of the future. A firm decision should be made to become a person of action, and consistently confirm this decision with one's behavior, demonstrating an active approach to life. Thirdly, it is important to significantly reduce the psychological barrier before starting an action. Many people find themselves in a state of stagnation, believing that immediate and large-scale steps must be taken. However, true progress is achieved through small but consistent actions, gradually accumulating and leading to significant results. If a task seems overwhelming, it should be divided into smaller, manageable components. For example, when starting a new project, it is enough to devote just 5 minutes a day to it. When forming a new habit, start with the simplest and most accessible version of it. Small steps taken regularly will inevitably lead to significant transformations. Finally, it is necessary to make a conscious decision to make decisions more quickly. Excessive deliberation and hesitation are among the main factors contributing to passivity and inaction. The longer a person hesitates, the more doubts and fears intensify, paralyzing the will. One should pull oneself together and set a clear rule. When faced with the need to make a decision, allow oneself a limited period of time for reflection, be it 5 seconds, 5 minutes, or 1 day, after which one must act decisively and move forward, not allowing doubts to stop progress. Ultimately, life favors those who act, because opportunities do not tolerate delay and time relentlessly moves forward. The future is shaped in the present moment, determined by every choice made. Therefore, the key question is, what steps will be taken next? Will the person continue to wait, indulging in reflections and doubts? Or will they gather their courage, take a decisive step forward, and start building the life they sincerely dream of? This choice belongs entirely to them, and it is this choice more than anything else that will determine their future destiny.